Imagine growing up with a secret so heavy, it feels like a constant weight on your chest. Ethan, a 22-year-old man from the small town of Durham, North Carolina, carried that secret for years, a secret that, if revealed, could tear his world apart. As a young child, Ethan learned early on that his family's world didn't have a place for someone like him. He grew up in a household where love was conditional, and expectations were clear: be strong, be tough, and never, under any circumstances, show any weakness. His father, John, was a stern man with little tolerance for anything that went against his values. And one thing he was clear about was his utter disdain for gay people. For years, Ethan lived in fear of being found out, fear of rejection, and fear of losing his family. His heart longed for the freedom to be himself, but he knew that the price of that freedom might be more than he could bear. He watched as his friends dated, embraced their identities, and lived their lives freely. But he stayed hidden in the shadows, trapped by the fear of his father's rage. If you've ever felt the pressure to hide who you truly are, or if you're living with fear about opening up to the people you love, share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be the one that helps someone else who's going through the same thing. Ethan's fear of rejection was rooted deep. His father's words were always harsh, often laced with venom. "I don't want any of that nonsense in this house. You're not one of those people." Those words stayed with him, haunting his every thought. Ethan was determined to never let his secret slip. But as time went on, the weight of the lie grew unbearable. It wasn't until his senior year of college that things began to unravel. The pressure became too much to handle, and Ethan found himself on the verge of a breakdown. And that's when the phone call came. It was his mother, Mary, her voice shaking, her words barely audible over the phone. "Ethan, your father's, he found out, he knows, and he's furious." Ethan's heart sank. He never thought the day would come when his father would find out, especially not like this. The truth had been buried deep for so long, hidden behind a facade of normalcy. And now, that secret had shattered everything. John's reaction was explosive. He didn't just yell, he raged. Ethan could hear his father's voice trembling with anger as he screamed over the phone, "I don't want any son of mine to be one of them." The words cut through Ethan like a knife. For a brief moment, all he could hear was the pounding of his heart, echoing in his ears. The next few days were a blur of tension, fear, and isolation. John refused to speak to him, and every glance from his father felt like a judgment. Mary, on the other hand, was torn. She didn't know how to handle it. She loved her son, but she didn't know how to deal with her husband's fury. She tried to be there for Ethan, but the weight of her own confusion and guilt made it hard for her to know what to say or do. What do you do when the person you love most rejects you for who you are? If you've ever faced rejection or struggled with the fear of coming out, share your experience in the comments. Your words could help someone else going through the same thing. In the days that followed, Ethan retreated further into himself. He spent hours staring at the walls, wondering how he had gotten here, how he had let it all come to this point. Every time he tried to find comfort in his friends, they didn't understand. They couldn't. They weren't living his life. They didn't know the weight of the lies he had to tell just to survive. As the weeks passed, John's anger turned into cold silence. It was worse than the yelling. It was the refusal to acknowledge Ethan at all. It was as if he was no longer his son, as if the man he had loved and looked up to had disappeared forever. And that silence, more than anything, made Ethan feel invisible. Sometimes the hardest part of being true to yourself is feeling like you're all alone. If you're struggling with the pressure to hide your true identity, or if you're going through this kind of silence from your family, leave a comment below. You're not alone. It was as if he was no longer your story could help someone else. As if the man he had loved and looked up to isolation continued forever. But the turning point came one evening, when his father, in a drunken rage, did something that would change their lives forever. John came home late one night, his breath heavy with the stench of alcohol. He staggered into the house, slamming doors and muttering curses under his breath. Mary tried to calm him, but the storm inside John was too much. With a flick of the match, everything changed. The house went up in flames, a result of John's careless anger. It wasn't just physical destruction. It symbolized the collapse of everything Ethan had known. Mary screamed as she tried to salvage what she could, but it was too late. The fire burned through everything they had worked for, leaving only ashes behind. For Ethan, the fire was more than just a tragedy. It was a representation of the wreckage inside his family, the devastation of years of hatred and rejection. In the aftermath, John was arrested. The fire had caused severe damage, and the investigation showed signs of arson. It was a dark moment in their family's history, one that Ethan could never forget. But the consequences didn't stop there. John, already struggling with his own demons, spiraled even further after the fire. Weeks later, Ethan received a call from the hospital. His father had been in a car accident. The report stated that he was severely injured, likely due to being under the influence at the time. Ethan stood there numb. A part of him felt sympathy for his father. He was human after all. But the pain of everything that had happened still lingered. John's actions had caused irreparable damage. Have you ever felt that someone's actions hurt you in ways you can't fix? If you've ever had to cope with someone's destructive behavior, or if you've struggled with family trauma, leave a comment below. Sharing your experience might help others who are trying to heal. John's accident was a wake-up call, but it didn't immediately lead to any kind of reconciliation. In fact, it sent their family into a deeper spiral of pain. Ethan's father was in a coma for several weeks, and when he finally woke up, he was different, broken, distant, and most of all, ashamed. His face was pale, his eyes vacant, as if he had been living in a nightmare and didn't know how to wake up from it. Mary, exhausted and still reeling from the fire and the accident, tried to support him, but she couldn't help feeling the weight of her own grief. She didn't know how to help John, or how to help Ethan. She had spent years trying to keep the family together, but she could see now that things weren't going to just fix themselves. In those months, Ethan watched his father's slow decline into depression. It was as though everything that John had once stood for, his pride, his strength, his anger, had evaporated. And as Ethan saw his father crumble, something inside of him started to change too. He began to question everything he had been taught, everything he had believed about love, shame, and identity. He began to see that his father's hatred was rooted in his own pain, not just in an unreasonable prejudice against people like Ethan. But even with all that understanding, forgiveness didn't come easily. Ethan was still haunted by the words his father had said to him, the things he had done. He had been forced to carry the weight of a secret for so long, and now, with his father's actions laid bare, the scars were too deep. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is realizing that forgiveness doesn't happen overnight. If you've been struggling with forgiveness or healing after someone's hurt you, share your thoughts in the comments. We're all on this journey together, and your words might give someone the strength to keep going. Ethan spent months grappling with his emotions. He found himself going through cycles of anger, confusion, and deep sorrow. He couldn't ignore the hurt, but he also couldn't ignore the growing desire to heal, not just for himself, but for his family. One day, he finally went to see his father. The meeting wasn't easy. There were no grand words of apology, no instant reconciliation. It was raw, messy, and uncomfortable. But Ethan could see that John, despite everything, was trying. And that was enough for now. I know I've hurt you, Ethan, John said, his voice trembling. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm trying. I'm trying to be a better man, for you. Months turned into years, and while things weren't perfect, they slowly began to improve. Ethan continued to live his life, still carrying the weight of his secret for a while longer. But the pressure of pretending, of living in a world where his truth was something to be hidden, became unbearable again. He couldn't keep it inside any longer. It wasn't a sudden decision. It was a quiet moment of clarity. Ethan knew that he needed to be free, not just for himself, but for his family too. He needed them to see him, not just the person they expected him to be, but the person he truly was. One evening, after years of internal struggle, Ethan sat down with his mother. His father had been in therapy for a while now, slowly working through his issues. Mary had been supportive, but Ethan could still feel the hesitation in her. She had been raised in a world that taught her to fear what she didn't understand, and she still had doubts. With a deep breath, Ethan finally spoke the words he had been hiding for so long. Mom, I'm gay. For a moment, the room was silent. Mary didn't respond. Ethan could see her processing the words, trying to piece together everything she had learned about her son in those brief seconds. He waited, his heart pounding in his chest. Then, in the softest voice, Mary whispered, I love you, Ethan. I just didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to deal with it. Coming out is never easy, and sometimes it feels like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. If you've ever come out or are struggling with the fear of doing so, share your experience in the comments. Your journey could help someone else who's feeling the same fear. That moment marked a turning point for Ethan. His mother, despite her fears and her hesitation, had finally accepted him for who he was. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was a start. And sometimes, all you need is that first step toward truth. It wasn't until several more months had passed that Ethan felt ready to confront his father. John had been working through his issues, but Ethan had no idea how his father would respond. The man who once screamed that he hated gay people, the man who had caused so much pain, was now a shell of who he once was. And Ethan wasn't sure if that meant he was ready for the truth. One evening, as John sat in his favorite chair, looking out the window, Ethan sat down beside him. They sat in silence for a few moments before Ethan finally spoke. "Father, there's something I need to tell you. I've been carrying this for a long time and I can't hide it any longer. I'm gay." There was a long pause, a silence that felt like it lasted forever. Ethan's heart raced, and he watched as his father's face twisted with confusion. For a brief moment, it looked like John might explode. But then something changed. John's shoulders slumped, and his eyes softened. I don't know what to say, son," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I know that I love you. I've been so lost in my own pain that I couldn't see you. I'm sorry." Sometimes, we hold on to our own pain so tightly that we forget to see the ones we love. If you've ever been afraid to share your truth with someone you love, or if you've struggled with accepting someone's truth, leave a comment below. We're all learning to grow, and your experience might help someone else find their way. And in the weeks that followed, the road to healing wasn't easy for Ethan or for his father. John was still grappling with his own prejudices, and he had to confront years of his own inner demons. The weight of his actions, the anger, the rejection, and even the fire still haunted him. But the fact that he was willing to admit his mistakes was a step forward. Ethan could see that his father was trying, and that made all the difference. Ethan, for his part, found a peace he had never known before. He no longer had to hide who he was. But the journey wasn't over. Even though his family was beginning to heal, the world outside wasn't always as accepting. There were still moments of doubt, of fear, of feeling like an outsider. Ethan knew that the world wasn't going to change overnight. But the fact that he had his mother's support, and now his father's too, gave him a strength he had never imagined possible. But just when Ethan thought things were getting better, a new challenge arose. The small town of Durham, North Carolina, still had its fair share of judgment and narrow-mindedness. One afternoon, as Ethan was walking through town with a friend, he overheard a group of people whispering behind him. "Did you hear about Ethan, the son of John? The one who, well, you know." Ethan's heart sank. The fear, the shame, the judgment, everything he had fought to overcome seemed to come crashing down all at once. But this time, something was different. This time, he didn't feel the need to hide. He didn't feel the weight of their words crushing him. He turned to his friend, smiled, and walked away. Facing judgment can be one of the hardest parts of being true to yourself. If you've ever been judged or shamed for who you are, leave a comment below. How did you rise above it? Your story might help someone find the strength to stand tall. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized that the opinions of others didn't define him. The love and acceptance he had fought so hard to find, first from his mother, then his father, had given him the power to be himself in a way he never thought possible. And although the road ahead was still uncertain, Ethan knew one thing for sure. He had his family, and he had his truth. As months passed, Ethan's life began to take shape in ways he hadn't imagined before. With his family's support, he began to explore the parts of himself he had locked away for so long. He connected with other members of the LGBTQ+ community, found a group of friends who understood him, and slowly started building a life outside the shadows of fear and rejection. His relationship with his father, though still fragile, began to evolve. John attended counseling and worked through his anger, slowly learning to accept Ethan's identity. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, but those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. The love between father and son, though complicated, was real. Ethan had always dreamed of going to college, but with the fire, the accident, and everything else, those dreams had seemed impossible. But now, for the first time, they felt within reach. He applied to several universities and was accepted into a prestigious program in New York City, a place where he could truly be himself, away from the small town where he had spent most of his life. It was bittersweet to leave home. Ethan had spent so much of his life hiding, and now he was moving forward into a new chapter of freedom. The thought of leaving his mother and father behind, though, weighed on him. Mary had supported him, but the idea of being away from her was hard to shake. John, on the other hand, had made so much progress, but Ethan still wondered if his father would truly be able to handle his absence. He had been the pillar of their broken family, and Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready to let go. But deep down, Ethan knew it was time. Leaving home can be a huge step, especially when you've spent years hiding your truth. If you've ever made the decision to leave or are thinking about it, share your thoughts in the comments. How did you find the strength to move forward? The night before Ethan left, he sat down with his parents, a quiet dinner between them. There were no big speeches, no dramatic moments, just a simple, heartfelt conversation about the future. John, with his eyes filled with emotion, looked at his son and said, "I'm proud of you, Ethan. No matter where you go, I'll always be your father. I've made a lot of mistakes, but this is one thing I got right." Mary smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. "You're going to do great things, Ethan. I believe in you." And in that moment, Ethan realized that no matter where he went, he would always have their love. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Ethan's first few weeks in New York were a whirlwind. The city's energy, its fast pace, the endless possibilities. It was everything he had dreamed of. He settled into his dorm, met new people, and slowly began to carve out a space for himself in this new world. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to hide who he was. He started to share his story, his truth, with people he met. Some were understanding, others surprised, but no one rejected him. In this new world, he felt free from the weight of secrecy, free from the pain of judgment, and free to be himself. However, the freedom came with its own set of challenges. Even in a city as diverse as New York, there were still moments where Ethan felt like an outsider. The weight of his past, his family's struggles, and the lingering memories of those difficult years back home occasionally resurfaced. But every time they did, he reminded himself of how far he had come. His relationship with his father continued to improve from a distance. They spoke on the phone regularly, and John, though still working through his issues, seemed proud of his son's progress. The wounds of the past hadn't healed completely, but they were no longer defining their relationship. And with each passing day, Ethan felt himself growing stronger. He became involved in LGBTQ+ advocacy, using his story to help others who were going through similar struggles. He had found his purpose, and with it, a sense of fulfillment he had never imagined possible. Finding your place in the world isn't easy, but it's worth the journey. If you've ever had to start over in a new place, or found freedom in embracing your true self, leave a comment below. Your experience could be the inspiration someone else needs to take that first step. Ethan was no longer the boy trapped by his father's hatred or the fear of being rejected. He was a young man who had learned to stand tall, to speak his truth, and to live a life of authenticity. And although the past would always be a part of him, it no longer had the power to control him. As the months passed, Ethan felt a sense of peace he had never experienced before. The trauma of his past, his father's anger, the fire, the years of hiding, began to feel like distant memories. They no longer had the same hold on him. His relationship with his parents, though not perfect, was no longer defined by pain and rejection. Ethan spoke to his father more frequently, and although John was still struggling with his own demons, he continued to show his son that he was trying. The anger that had once consumed John was now replaced with quiet reflection and, at times, sorrow. But there was also a newfound willingness to understand, to be a better man for his son. One evening, after months of silence about his own feelings, John sent Ethan a message. It was simple, yet powerful. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I love you. I see now that my hate was just fear. I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to be a father who's proud of you." The message brought tears to Ethan's eyes. He had waited so long to hear those words, and while they didn't erase the past, they helped heal some of the deepest wounds. Sometimes, the hardest part of healing is realizing that forgiveness and acceptance come at their own pace. If you've ever had to wait for someone's acceptance or struggled with your own forgiveness, share your story in the comments. Your words might help someone else who's waiting for their moment. As for Mary, Ethan's relationship with her had flourished in ways he couldn't have imagined when he first came out. She had always been supportive, but over time, she became a fierce advocate for her son. She attended LGBTQ plus events with him, spoke to her friends about the importance of acceptance, and was proud to show the world that she loved her son just as he was. The small town that had once shunned them began to notice a change. Ethan and his family weren't the outcasts they once were. They were simply a family flawed, but whole. Ethan had come to realize that love, even in its messy, imperfect form, was enough. It was enough for him to live his life openly. It was enough for him to share his story with the world. And it was enough to start the healing process for everyone involved. Family dynamics can be complex, and healing takes time. If you've had to rebuild your relationship with a loved one or find your way through difficult family struggles, leave a comment below. Your experience could offer hope to someone else in the same position. Years later, Ethan found himself sitting in a quiet cafe in New York City, reflecting on how far he had come. The path hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every struggle, every tear, every painful step. He had learned to live authentically, to stand tall, and to embrace his truth without shame. And now, looking back, he realized how far not just he, but his entire family had come. His father, John, who once told him that he hated gay people, was now a man who understood the power of love. A man who had learned to leave the hate behind and embrace his son for who he truly was. Ethan smiled as he thought about his dad's words during their last conversation. I may not have been the father you needed in the beginning, but I'm trying to be the father you deserve now. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was progress, and that was enough. Ethan was living a life he never thought possible. A life where he was free, accepted, and loved. He had his family, his friends, and the world ahead of him. His journey had come full circle. He no longer feared being himself, no longer lived in the shadows of his father's hatred. He was his own person now, a man who had the strength to face the world as he was. He looked down at his phone, seeing a text from his mom. I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You've come a long way, and I'm excited to see where your journey takes you next. A simple text, but it meant everything. Sometimes the journey toward acceptance isn't easy, but every step forward counts. If you've had moments where you felt like you finally reached peace with your past, share your experience in the comments below. Your story could give someone else the courage to keep moving forward. As Ethan looked out at the city skyline, he thought about how far he had come. The man who once feared rejection, the boy who lived in hiding, was now the person he was always meant to be. He had faced his past, overcome his struggles, and emerged stronger for it. And the best part? He had done it all with love. As Ethan continued to build his life in New York, there was a quiet confidence in the way he walked through the world. He no longer looked over his shoulder, no longer second-guessed himself when entering a room or meeting new people. The boy who once hid his truth behind a mask was now a man who wore it with pride. He still kept in touch with his parents regularly. John, his father, had not only apologized, but had worked hard to make up for the years of damage his words and actions had caused. John's relationship with Ethan was far from perfect, but they had reached a place of mutual respect and understanding. Ethan never stopped being proud of his father for making that effort. And then, there was his mother, Mary, steadfast, loving, and always on his side. She had walked beside him through the hardest parts of his journey and had supported him with a fierce love that only a mother could give. Watching her evolve from a woman who was unsure to one who was his biggest ally had been one of the most rewarding experiences of his life. Ethan had learned that family doesn't have to be perfect to be real. Love doesn't have to be without flaws to be powerful. What mattered was that they had chosen each other, again and again, through every difficult conversation and every painful step forward. As he sat in the cafe, a sense of calm washed over him. Ethan was ready for whatever came next. His past no longer defined him. His truth was his strength, and he would carry that with him always. Every journey has its challenges, but it's the love and acceptance that carry us forward. If you've ever had to rebuild or reimagine your future after hardship, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story could help someone else see that they too have a future full of possibilities. With the future ahead of him, Ethan no longer carried the weight of shame or fear. He was a man free to chase his dreams, to be who he truly was, and to live without hiding. His story wasn't just one of struggle, it was one of triumph, of love, and of acceptance. And as long as he had his truth, he knew he could face anything. If you've been on a journey of self-discovery, acceptance, or healing, share your story in the comments below. You never know whose life you might touch, or how your experience could inspire someone else to take their first step toward living their truth. If you've connected with Ethan's story, or if you're on your own journey of self-acceptance, this channel is a place where you can be heard and embraced. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Here, your voice matters, and you're not alone. Join our community, where we celebrate each other's truth and growth.